Hello and welcome everyone to another show of the Catholic Money Mastermind podcast. I'm your host, Ben Martinek, and today I'm joined by another financial advisor out of the Chattanooga, Tennessee area with Ethos Logos Investments. His name is KJ Smith. KJ, go ahead and just say hi to the audience if you can.
Hi there, everybody. I'm very excited for the conversation. Thank you so much for having me on, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. KJ, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. You know, we have had a wider range of topics and subject matters that are covered, but you, I think, are uniquely positioned to kind of speak to theological and financial matters just because part of your background intersects in that. I mean, your education was in these matters, and you have a deep interest and passion in church teaching, especially Catholic social teaching, and what the implications are for not just how we should love our neighbors, but how we should love our neighbors in a very visceral way of the work that we do and our labors and the economic impact that our daily money decisions have, and to kind of really take the gospel home and carry over from Sunday into Monday through Friday. So I'm looking to kind of just gather, some of your background and education and teaching and interest in this, and just see what you have to share in that matter. But before we get into the subject, could you just share a little bit about your background? Where you're from, what gets you, maybe interested in the subject matter, and a little bit about your financial advisory firm.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from the Chicagoland area, and I grew up cradle Catholic. My parents had always instilled in us the values that your faith is not just the right to worship, but it also informs your daily actions. And that was what you referenced, and that was what formed your conscience when you engaged with anyone, whether it was within your family, out what you did for work even. And so I ended up going to school at Loyola University Chicago. I studied finance and theology there. Theology because I enjoyed it, and finance because I didn't want to be a teacher and I wanted to have a family and provide for them. So even for the first 10 years of my career, people would literally laugh at me and they'd be like, finance and theology, what does that have to do with one another? And for the first 10 years of and for the first 10 years of my career, I would say, well, I don't know. I just liked it. And then it was one of those that, like, looking back now, I go, oh, the Lord writes straight with crooked lines, that now it makes sense. And they absolutely are an integral thing together. And the fact that a lot of people don't recognize that, I think that's kind of where I feel called, is not just to provide financial services or investment advice or financial planning, but to evangelize Catholic social teaching, because the economy is a major channel where we encounter our neighbor, and the church is not silent on this and does talk to us about how we are to do that, and a lot of people don't know it. So again, it just goes back to when the faith informs everything that you do, you want to share that. And so I founded Ethos Logos Investments about 8-9 years ago now. After I worked for Catholic institutions on the institutional side all across the Midwest and the South. And we invested per USCCB guidelines for those Catholic institutions. And what I saw was kind of twofold. One, that the folks that I was encountering that were the big donors had never considered that they should invest in a Catholic way for themselves as individuals. And then I also saw that there was a gap where the institutions, although they invested per Catholic social teaching as an institution, the employer-sponsored retirement plans that they provided were not in alignment with Catholic social teaching, and therefore they weren't really evangelizing the proper faith to these folks. And a lot of the people that work for the Catholic institutions didn't want to participate in the 403B or the 401k because they were violating their conscience doing it. And I thought, man, we need to do better than that, and help, evangelize and help, form the mission of these Catholic churches and these dioceses and these institutions. So I founded Ethos Logos in 2018, I guess.
A handful of years ago in response to that. Now, that is a fascinating dynamic, right? Where we have, on an institutional level, Catholics who we're promoting and teaching, and they're required, through the USCCB guidelines to implement, moral screens within their own investment options. But then within the 401k that they're offering to their employee, there's a lack of moral screen or at least socially governed options within those investments. So it would seem like an odd dichotomy of like, well, wait one second. I mean, your actual investment portfolio has this in play, but you're not going to provide that to your employees equally as much. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, KJ. I mean, what was some of the practical implications of implementing this so far? I mean, are there funds that you're pursuing? Are you creating your own funds? Are you managing and choosing companies? Like how are you, without getting into too much of the weeds of that, because I want us to get into the encyclicals primarily, but how are you implementing some of this in the practical way?
So it's although it's been around since like the 1980s, socially responsible investing, it's really ramped up recently, and I think it's a generational thing as well. The younger generations tend to feel that they need to take their ethics and their values into account. So there's more and more availability of funds and money managers out there. And I got exposed to it and learned a lot about it through working with the Catholic institutions, because those institutional money managers, there's a lot of money in the church. And so there's a lot of institutional companies that want to serve the church. And in order to do so, they had to learn the Catholic social teaching and provide that. And so in that place, I learned the third-party money managers, the mutual funds, the investors that do this, as well as the tools of how do you screen, who do you screen, how often do you screen, and what are some of the nuances associated with either screening, active ownership, proactively selecting companies that are doing good. And so that's where I learned the nuances and was able to transition that over. So I don't create any funds. It's really using what's available out there. There are faith-based funds that adhere to Catholic teaching. There are faith-based funds that adhere to biblical teachings. And then there's a lot of funds out there that just don't violate Catholic teaching. And that's really what you're looking for. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Catholic investment company or fund, but they do need to not violate Catholic teaching in order for you to invest in it with a clear Catholic conscience.
Gotcha. Well, maybe let's start with that then. So, I mean, what would you see? I mean, we've had some questions or concerns here about how to invest well as a Catholic. But we haven't had it so well read into the teaching. So, I mean, where would you see it as a violation of Catholic social teaching on an investor level? What are some of the common infractions or points of concern?
Well, I do want to stress that discerning Catholics can disagree on some aspects and how you engage, and it also comes down to like what are you capable of doing. So on one side, there's intrinsic evils, and an intrinsic evil is something that you cannot have any participation in no matter what, because no amount of good could possibly make up for the level of evil that's being perpetrated. Yeah. And so that would be something like investing in embryonic stem cell research, production of abortifacients, pornography. These are things that it doesn't matter if you get diversification in your portfolio, that's not good enough. And so the life ethics screen is really the one where it has to be screened. And then on the other side of it, you could look at something like alcohol or tobacco, where there's nothing in and of itself evil about, say, having a drink or smoking a cigar. But those companies, the profits come from folks that are generally have a dependency issue. I think it's something like over 80% of alcohol sales are to folks that have like more than 50 drinks a week. And so there's a certain sin against temperance. And so then you could go back and forth and say, okay, is it a legitimate place to get a profit when these profits are coming from people that have dependency issues on these substances? And you may screen that out of the portfolio. You may engage with the companies that you hold to say, hey, what are you doing to help combat this? Or to make sure that you're not profiting off the backs of your fellow man, because that's really where the problem comes into play. The idea of Catholic investing is that you are providing capital to companies that do good. They produce good in the world. It's not just speculation, and it's certainly not profiting off the backs of others or off the detriments of your fellow man. And so there's different ways that you can implement that in your portfolio, but the hard and fast rule is that you can't profit from intrinsic evils. That has to be screened out. And then from there on, there's some discernment of the person of how do you actually invest in a Catholic way.
Sure, because I mean, first and foremost, right, in the hierarchy of social teaching and the precepts, I mean, our primary concern has to always be the dignity of the human person, right? And so we can't be turning, and to use in the Kantian terms, we can't be turning a means into an end. Or
Absolutely.
isn't that right? Or is it the other way around? But we can't be using other people and basically effectively objectifying them and turning them into a tool for our own benefit. We have to respect them in their own right, fundamentally. So could you just speak a little bit of, I would presume that in all the violations that you just identified, the violation fundamentally comes against that first precept that we're not failing to respect human dignity. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything in Catholic social teaching, everything in Catholic investing spawns from that first principle of human dignity. Because even everything from there, whether it's social justice or economic justice or stewardship of the environment, that all comes, like, stewardship of the environment is one some people have a hard time getting their mind around because they feel like these are gifts that are here for us to use and we have dominion. And they think more of the dominion aspect rather than being like the global gardeners that are here to steward these things. But again, it's for the sake of the generations to come, that the Lord gave us a finite number of natural resources, and we have to be good stewards of those resources so that they're not just for my use, but they're for my grandchildren's use and my great-great-great-grandchildren's use and your great-grandchildren's use. That's part of solidarity, is that we're all in this together, whether I was born first or not. So everything spawns from that. We are one human race, and I'm called to pick up my cross, but in truth, I'm actually called to pick up the cross of those who can't pick it up for themselves as well. And if we all do that, then we're taking care of each other. And so again, it all comes back to human dignity.
Yeah, so there's this notion of taking care of each other and fundamentally not exploiting others. It's good for us to make a return on our money, and in fact, there's kind of a moral duty to do so. We're not we'd be poor stewards to not and to make we'd just be wasting our money away. But it's the means by which we make our money that we still have to have some concern of, and we ultimately can't be doing it by putting other fellow humans into slavery or leaving them at least in a disadvantaged state. And fundamentally, our profiting is because of them being disadvantaged and wanting to keep them disadvantaged. Like that would be where the violation inherently lies. Although that kind of begs this question of there is still going to be this inequality that takes place. I kind of would like to work through the rest of these precepts that that you had shared ahead of our call, and I think it would be worthwhile to share with the audience. But there is always this pesky issue that people have within economic financial matters is of this notion that of me improving myself and maybe others improving themselves, but us still being in unequal or not similar positions, right? Mm-hmm. And perhaps maybe I improve myself even better than the next person. To what extent can inequality persist and not become a violation of human dignity? I don't know if that was something you were intending for us to pivot into, but it seems to have maybe some relevance to the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an absolutely wonderful point. And Saint Teresa of Lisieux talks about this in her book, Story of a Soul, that she couldn't understand, and it's not economically, but it's the graces of the soul. That there are certain souls that have never committed a mortal sin, and there are certain souls that really struggle. And and she likens them to all the different flowers of the field, and the rose doesn't take away the beauty of the tulip, that you need them all. Mm-hmm. And you could go back to scripture and the parable of the talents that Jesus said, the three servants weren't all given the same amount. One servant was given more, and one servant was given less, and one servant was given the middle. And the two servants that took what they were given and did well with it were both accoladed as wonderful servants, and you did a great job. And so we all have different spiritual gifts. We all have different amount of economic gifts, and it is our call of what we do with that. And there is, just by the nature of reality, there is going to be a discrepancy. But is it ordered towards the good of all man? And are you loving your neighbor with what you've been given? So yeah, absolutely. There's that inequality does not necessarily equal injustice.
Right.
To whom was given more will be expected. That's biblical.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect way to describe that. Just because there's and it doesn't, maybe to that point of injustice, it doesn't mean where there's a violation of human dignity. So, I can have an appreciation and desire to improve the fate of another, and in fact, labor to do that. But simply, I can at the same time financially become better off or improve myself more than than another brother and not have caused an injustice in the process or violated their arrangement. And that does, there just can be a lot of focus on this notion of inequality. And that's a whole other subject matter we can get into in terms of what makes something fair. But I think it's at least worth noting that our intent in raising up human dignity isn't to say that all things need to become equal. Like that's not the intended outcome of that assertion. But maybe to move beyond that first precept of respecting human dignity, again, you had identified, KJ, about up to 7 of these in terms of church teaching. What would be the next one that you'd like to share or speak to?
I mean, there are 7 principles of Catholic social teaching, and they're hierarchical. They build off of each other. The second one is just that we are social beings, and we're called to family, community, and participation. And that's another one where I think some people don't realize how that necessarily pertains to our economic life and our political life. We're not called to be islands within ourselves. We are called to be part of the larger social institutions and to build those up and improve those for everyone. And so there are certain, and that goes to the third principle, which is the rights and responsibilities of people. We have rights as individuals, but we also have responsibilities as individuals and responsibilities to our family, to our community. And one of those things, again, is the modern construct of the economy, where some folks you'll hear some people talk about, well, investing is just speculation and speculation is bad, and so you shouldn't do it. But in reality, the modern economic system is such that we can provide capital to businesses that do good work, that produce medicine and produce technologies that raise the tide for everyone. And so by exiting the world and exiting out of that, we're really violating that concept of being part of being called to community. Because again, the economy is a major channel where we meet our neighbor. And so we just have to make sure that we're participating in the economy as Christ would. You know, the economy obviously is very different now than it was 2,000 years ago, but the principles are identical.
Yeah, so I mean, and what's interesting about those next 2 principles that you're identifying is, look, conceivably, I could, respect the dignity of others. Possibly, I don't know, I live as a hermit or cut myself off into the woods, and I don't want to necessarily think of and suggest that, the heretical life is somehow in violation to church teaching. But there is, our obligation, there would almost be a failure maybe to human dignity to completely remove ourselves from society. We're interdependent, perhaps is the way to describe this best. And so we have these responsibilities, not just to treat people well, but to be engaged with their people and to be seen. Part of us recognizing maybe our own dignity, but their dignity is to be, engaged in ways to make not just my life better, but other people's lives better. How can we be a source of progress or improvement? Do you kind of see that to be the case between those next 2 principles, between this notion of that we're social beings and that we have obligations towards others and not just, rights, protections that we should be receiving, as part of our common living together?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the third principle of Catholic social teaching, that as an individual, you have certain inalienable rights, which is very easy for us in the United States to get behind because we're founded on those principles. But that along with those rights, you also have responsibilities. And just say, like, the hermit, that's a valid path, but that is a specific calling for specific people. And even if you look at hermits throughout time, like the Desert Fathers and things, like they've impacted humanity through what they did. They may have removed themselves from society, but we have writings, we have teachings, we have experiences that we've learned from them. And so you might have a calling to remove yourself from society, to be a cloistered nun or something, but you don't have a calling to sit in your bedroom and not participate, not engage, and just let the world burn.
Right. I mean, we could cut ourselves off from everything and do no harm per se to another human directly, but there would be still a violation that we're having of not just our own human dignity, but maybe the dignity of others by simply not participating and intentionally cutting yourself out. So, I mean, there would be, what would you have to say then, or maybe what would the church have to say in response to survivalists or preppers or, all these people who fear this doomsday apocalyptical scenario and, maybe want to protect themselves against that, but usually at the expense of everyone else, right? they're trying to get the first jump or the early scoop on things going sideways. I'm kind of curious, what would you have to say on that approach?
I've never seen preppers necessarily as somebody who is damaging society by their way of like hoarding ammunition and canned goods. Like that's a certain element of their own perception on the world. And there's lots of different people out there, right? We're all, like, one analogy is that we're all a thread in a major tapestry, or we're all one note that's played for a moment in an orchestra that is divine providence, that we are called to play our role in divine providence, and it takes all sorts. And maybe those people that are prepping for the future are the ones who down the road are going to be able to help their fellow man who maybe didn't have enough toilet paper stored away. And so then again, you have the right to personal property as long as it's ordered towards the good of all. And so I don't necessarily see like people that are pulling themselves in like prepping for maybe Armageddon as damaging society. If anything, I mean, they are purchasing, right? They're engaging the economy. So yeah, it takes all kinds, and everybody has their own path, both spiritually to get to heaven as well as here on earth. You have your own role to play. I would say that it's the folks that are ignoring their responsibilities to society that are not fulfilling their obligation to God for like the purpose of why they were created, because we were created as social beings, and we weren't put here to create ourselves. We were put here to discover ourselves. Like, what is it that God is calling me to do, and what are my unique skills, abilities, temperament, perceptions that enable me to achieve these goals? And again, those aren't given, they're not the same to everyone. Everybody is different, and so to some are given more and some are given different.
Yeah, we've had on the show previously a quote from St. John Henry Newman related to my mission in life, and I don't have it ready to be pulled up, but the overall theme of that is that each of us has been given here with a specific purpose, a mission, and that it's the prayer is to ask for God to help us to see it and understand it, even if it may be hidden from us or rather mysterious or difficult perhaps to accept, because at times it's challenging and it could even seem unfair or wrong. Maybe we're being mistreated, but we continue to march on in faith and belief that God's reasons. God has His reasons, and that'll be manifested to us at some point, revealed to us. Yeah. It hopefully, maybe in this life, but certainly, hopefully, in the next life. So, what would be maybe to continue on? So, I think we've hit upon maybe a lot of these principles, but I just want to make sure we think through them all thoroughly. So, I mean, the last ones that we were chatting on was this obligations, our rights and our responsibilities. What would be extending beyond our responsibilities to others?
It's an option to the poor and vulnerable. This idea, Christ said to pick up your cross daily and follow me. This option for the poor and solidarity is that we are all part of one greater good. We are all part of one greater human race, and that the burdens of one are the burdens of all. And so you're not just called to pick up your cross, you're actually called to pick up the cross of your neighbors who can't. And this goes back to the Old Testament, where they talked about caring for widows and orphans. So I mean, it's in the Acts of the Apostles as well, and then it goes on through time. So that is where, warfare and abortion, like you can juxtaposition those, because warfare, like there's a certain element of self-defense there, whereas abortion, it's the most vulnerable that can't, and the most innocent that cannot defend themselves. And so we are called to stand up on their behalf. So this option of the poor and vulnerable, and all these feed through the Laudato Si with that Pope Francis. He made the case that environmental stewardship is important, because environmental depletion degrades the poor and vulnerable first. They're the ones that are most reliant on their natural environment. And so the poor and the vulnerable are kind of the first to suffer when the natural environment is harmed. So so option for the poor and vulnerable that some of us have. Again, not everybody is given in equal measure. Some of us have more power than others, and those that have been given more power socially or economically are called to pick up the cross of those who can't.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm gathering from that, KJ, is just this notion, especially this juxtaposition between rights and responsibilities, and rights being largely this focus on a defense and making sure that I'm not being violated, and that my interests are being preserved, or only my dignity is being preserved. But this notion of responsibilities kind of suggests at its heart, and maybe just really the whole contrast in your educational background between finance and theology, and the oddity of the two of those being married together is, this sacrificial nature, that this giving up, this potential loss to me in fulfilling my responsibilities and obligations, and that it may cost me money for me to have this care for the poor and the vulnerable, and being bonded to other people may be an expense that I'm picking up and incurring. And kind of naturally enough in finance, we're always looking to, improve our margins and make the most money we can and cut off any unnecessary overhead or expense we have. So, why pick up an expense or cost that I don't have to? And so that's where it kind of really rubber meets the road and this thing gets tested as to how far do I need to pick up this expense of the suffering of another to be of assistance. And, we could spend a little bit of time, with that. I mean, I would imagine there's got to be some level of limits in which, how, we could potentially drain ourselves financially to be nothing in pursuit of helping others. So I'm kind of curious in terms of, obviously very supportive of this notion of us sharing the burdens and sacrifices and being present to others, even at a cost to us. But I'm kind of, is there like a clarification as to what point can we say we have fulfilled our duty, or we've fulfilled our responsibility and enough's been enough?
Not clearly defined,
Yeah.
because again, all people are called to operate differently. And I would say it was actually Dr. Scott Hahn talks about your sphere of influence, and different people have different spheres of influence. And so your calling is to influence as much you can within your sphere. And so, I have 5 kids. I don't have a ton of time outside of my own family, but I coach and I volunteer where I can. But it would be rather irresponsible of me, I feel, to take a mission trip to a war-torn area, because my primary vocation is as husband and father to my kids. And also I have clients that are relying on me to pay attention to the market and invest for them. So I'm not called to go and live in a third world country for the next 25 years, but there are monks that do, and that, they go, and that is what they are called to do. So that is where personal discernment comes in. And you have to provide for yourself. You have to provide for your own family and then your community. And some people will have a larger sphere of influence than others, but your focus should be kind of on your sphere of influence and expanding that if you can, but with prudent discernment.
Right. Because realistically, it's not possible for us to help everybody. On any level. In our businesses, financially, it is, the world's problems are outwardly beyond our individual scope, but we are still called to do our part and to respond, I suppose, accordingly. And so what I'm gathering or hearing from you, KJ, is each of us needs to hear, really the call of the Lord to do what you're being asked to do, and recognize, yes, it may require sacrifice. And that's kind of part of the deal. If it isn't sacrificial in some ways, then maybe there's a question as to whether or not you're actually responding or fulfilling your obligation. We should feel the pinch, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're out to deplete ourselves, because would you see that maybe that even just because it perhaps is impractical, but would that depletion come to a point of where it's either a failure of stewardship, or I could see it almost as like a vice, or going too far. Where would the violation, I'm curious, just kind of thinking out loud, would you think if you went too far and depleted yourself too far, where's the violation at in your take?
Again, I feel like that's going to be very much up to personal discernment, because there are going to be some, at one point Christ sent his apostles out 2 by 2 and take nothing but a walking staff, and rely entirely on others. And so you could say that was a violation, because you're taking goods from others. Yeah, right. You didn't prepare adequately, but in that instance, it was appropriate. Sure. I think that on the other side of it, to not have health insurance and not plan for your retirement, so that at some point you are dependent on the state and you can't work, and so now you're living off of government subsidies, and you're getting all this medical treatment for free. That's a drain on society and on your community, and so you've violated your rights to your community. And so there's a certain element of prudence of how can I contribute to the common good, But again, there are those who are called to, in like St. Francis, to just completely depend on divine providence. But that's not most of us. That's a particular call. Most of us have jobs and mortgages and bills that we should pay. And if we don't pay our bills, now we're draining society and we're draining, our neighbor.
Sure. So I mean, it's an interesting combination of rights and responsibilities, and perhaps we can leave it at that. But I mean, the rights are, expectations that we can have of society back to us, and ultimately in respect to us and our human dignity. But then there's, still a call. Perhaps one of the best ways in which this has ever been described, at least in my opinion, is just with what JFK had suggested in one of his speeches of, not ask what your country can do for you, but what can you do for your country. Like, we don't always have that sentiment very much. And I think it's very much part of the Catholic ethos. But, it's maybe not very much of the American ethos, which is perhaps an interesting dynamic of JFK calling that out. So it's within us as Catholics to be thinking of our fellow brothers and to be not just thinking of them, but to be suffering with them as needed and position ourselves at a loss also at times, to endure a real cost. But, to the extent that cost is endured, I suppose that's for each of our own consciences and discernment and what we believe God is calling and asking of us. Well, have we hit on all the 7 principles at this point, KJ? Or are there a few more yet that we need to go over?
I think it's just the first 4.
Oh, no way, really? We're cranking away here.
Yeah. So the 5th one, this is where Rerum Novarum comes in. This is the first encyclical that actually specifically directly dealt with Catholic social teaching in 1891 due to the Industrial Revolution. And that was Pope Leo XIII. And he talked about the dignity and the rights of workers. And that work, and this is also, you can look to Saint Jose Maria Escriva in talking about how work is how we sanctify ourselves. But it's the dignity of work and the rights of workers, because in the Industrial Revolution, the assets or wealth was getting narrowed to just a small group of people that controlled. And so then workers were getting exploited. And so that's where it came out and said, no, like, there is dignity to work. And even in our economics classes now, there's labor, there's capital, and labor plus capital equals output. And everybody's really excited about artificial intelligence now because we're thinking that that's an input that's going to get more output out of our inputs, because that's all you can adjust. You can adjust your capital and you can adjust your labor. But now there's that, I mean, it's kind of self-evident. Labor and capital, they're different. But during the Industrial Revolution, labor was considered capital. And the less I can pay, the more profits I'll have. And so Rerum Novarum came out and basically said, no, like, workers have dignity. The work that they have is dignified. They have the right to a just wage, a living wage. They also have the right to own property. They have the right that the work that they're doing is improving their circumstances and improving their family circumstances. It is not just concentrating wealth in a select group of business owners. And so that was where Rerum Novarum came out, and that was the first of the 16, 19 social encyclicals we have on Catholic social teaching. And then from there it went to, how communism and socialism is not an adequate response, and neither is unfettered laissez-faire capitalism, where it's just competition. That there is a requirement of the institutions of the governments of the world to protect justice and take care of, again, the poor and vulnerable. So yeah, it's the dignity of work and the rights of workers is the 5th one.
So it seems like it's like a kind of continuation, perhaps a different identification, but a continuation of the theme that we have going on here. And what's just perhaps the violation here of it? Like, look, maybe on an economic standard, it makes sense for me, or I can get away with paying you, I don't know, $2 an hour, but $2 an hour is insufficient for you to make a living. And so, like, there's a requirement in the fulfillment of these first 4 principles that the way this translates itself is that what I pay you is something that's sufficient for you to be able to maintain your dignity, or to make a way of life for yourself. And it may be rather simplified, unskilled labor where you're just digging ditches, but even at that, I have to pay you an amount, even at a cost to me that allows you to, allows you to live. Is it just as simple as that, KJ?
I would say that, it's the acknowledgement that digging a ditch is just as dignified as doing open heart surgery. Because again, we are all given different gifts, and maybe I don't have the intelligence to be a open heart surgeon, or maybe my hands tremble and I can't be a surgeon, but I can do something else. And my work is dignified. And again, just as St. Teresa of Lisieux talked about, there are all sort of different types, and your dignity is not tied to what you do. It's tied to your humanity. That doesn't mean that everybody's called to the same thing or even could do the same thing, but that doesn't mean that the president has more dignity than the janitor. They are absolutely equal in the eyes of God, and both beautiful for what the gifts are that they've been given and what they're doing with them.
Sure. So then, it gets back to this exploitation piece of this, where if the work is still equally dignified, then, maybe the degree of separation between the top and the bottom has somewhat of an inherent limit on that, because it would start to violate the notion that the work that both are doing is dignified labor. So that's kind of a fascinating. Thanks for clarifying that for me, because I felt like that was a great point of clarification. Let's hit on, just as we start to wrap up some of these points, I wouldn't mind hearing the last three, at least just to share them with the audience. And I'd like to, hear more about your own business and how you're integrating this in your advisory practice. But, if maybe in, again, a lightning fashion, what would you identify as the next three principles for consideration?
So we've hit 5 of them. So the last 2 really, and we've
touched 2 then.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
The last 2, and we touched on them. 6 is solidarity, that we're all in this together. We are all part of the whole, and what happens to the least of us happens to all of us. And then the last one is care for God's creation, that we are the global gardeners, that we have to take care of the environment for those that are coming next.
Let's spend a little bit of time with that. This seems maybe a little bit self-evident, but why this responsibility towards the environment? Is it's fundamentally because of recognizing the dignity of those to come? Is that what drives that, or what's the interest in towards the environment from the church's perspective?
Yeah, again, everything builds from that first principle of human dignity. So that is exactly what it is. And we are called to be co-creators with God. Robins make nests the same way they did 500 years ago. A fox den looks the same as it did 100 years ago. But we are different. So there's progress and there's development. That is what makes us uniquely human, is to create. But it was, now I'm blanking, and if it was John the 23rd or JP2 who made the distinction between progress and just development. We don't develop just to develop. We have to develop for progress. And progress is arts, it's culture, it's education, it's healthcare. There's a lot of things that we are called to put together and create. And it's for the purpose of the common good. And we have a finite amount of natural resources with which to do that. And so depleting those resources means that we are using an inordinate amount for our own selves out of a selfishness, or there's some right that we have dominion so we can use it however we want. And that's not the case. We need to steward these things, and we need to use them to develop society and to develop whatever it is, so that my kids have a more likely chance to thrive, to survive and thrive. And that I'm also establishing a manner of living and decision-making and work so that they can replicate, so that their kids are more likely to survive and thrive and have peace and have, so anyway, that's kind of the idea, is really the acknowledgement that it's all grace, it's all gift, and it's our job to use it to create for ourselves and for those that come next.
Yeah, I love this notion of it being inordinate, that we could ultimately, you almost have a line at the buffet, or if you're at a church picnic and the first people come can maybe be heaping up, and it's you can't just feed yourself with this. We've got everyone else coming behind us yet who also has to be fed on this. This isn't just for you, right? And so
that's a great analogy.
Yeah, it's kind of at its most basic level. It's just about sharing, right? I mean, and I have young daughters, young family. Perhaps you've seen this for yourself too, KJ. I mean, I feel like one of the most basic things that I'm trying to teach to my kids and my family is the importance of sharing and collaborating and getting along together, and not knowing when there's okay to have disparities between them and having degrees of unfairness, but then also being mindful and thinking of each other, and not just this innate desire for me. Which perhaps just to kind of start to bring this to a close. I mean, that's what's rather fascinating about your educational focus in both finance and theology, because you could very well see theology as being rather outward, or it's at least God-centered, right? Inherently, like that's what theology is about. And it's not about me; it's who God is. But finance, I don't necessarily think it has to be selfish, but it does tend to have this selfish bent to it, and it is about how can I make the most for myself, or how can I make the most money? Maybe is the simplest way to describe it. And so it's like there's a balance that comes place with having your theological background with the finance that brings this hopefully into the right perspective, and we're limiting or reducing our concerns towards greed, right? I mean, do you feel like if you were to do it all over again, this is my question for you, KJ, that would you study theology and finance again, or would you recommend others? It seems like you almost have to in order to keep finance in the right perspective.
I agree with that 100%. As I said, the first 10 years of my career, I didn't totally understand what they had to do with one another. And now it's rather clear that I have this calling towards helping others figure that out, and what is Catholic social teaching and how does that pertain? Because the church, that is one of the encyclicals, actually mother and teacher, the church has the truth. And the truth is eternal. It is outside of time. It doesn't change just because our social constructs and the way that we engage with each other and the economy changes. The spiritual truths are the spiritual truths, and they don't change. And so when we engage whatever it is, whatever your job is, it should be informed by your Catholic faith. And if you have to take your Catholic faith and put it over here, and then take your job and do it over here, then you're not living your faith, and your faith is dead. So you should be thinking about how can I be Christ-like in my business and in what I do. I mean, Christ said, as what I've done for you, as I've served you, go and do likewise. What happens to the least, what you do to the least of my brothers and sisters, you do for me. He could have come as a king. He came as a servant. So that's the idea. And those that are given a lot, those who either have political influence or have a lot of economic assets, that needs to be oriented for the common good and the good of all. And so this idea that investing is to make as much money as I can is an inherently misunderstanding of what it is we're doing. There are companies that make the world a better place for everyone, and they need access to capital, social capital as well as monetary capital. And that's what we're here, is to support those companies while being prudent stewards of what God has given us, so that I can plan for the future and I can build it. I don't need to invest in incredibly speculative ways to try to earn 50% growth. And if I don't do that, I'm being irresponsible. I don't need to squeeze every single little tiny fee out, regardless of whatever intrinsic evils I'm participating in. That's not the call. Yeah. The call is that to understand that everything I have, whether it's my intelligence or my money, was given to me by God, and I've been placed in this circumstance of my life to do good as a part of the community with rights and responsibilities, as part of my family, to protect human dignity. And how do I do that? And that's how my clients invest their money. The portfolios are, as I said, they're good for life and soul. We need to prepare for yourself, to take care of you, to take care of your family, but to do so in a way that makes the world rejoice, that makes the world a better place, and doesn't come at the backs of others.
Yeah. Well, KJ, I don't know if I could say any of what you just said any better. It was beautifully well said. So thank you so much for sharing that wisdom and your eloquence. Folks, as we start to wrap this up, I mean, if you're looking for financial advisors to help you in these day-to-day money decisions, and in particular, if you're looking for ways to invest your money, I mean, we thankfully have a whole network gathered together, the Catholic Financial Planners Network. It's growing every single month. We're bringing in new members across the country of other financial advisors who are joining and collaborating and working together and sharing ideas and making themselves available to help fellow Catholics, do exactly what we've really discussed today, to serve the common good and to respond to the call, the mission that God has given you. But we've had really just a wonderful example given here today also in KJ, and everything that you've had to share, KJ. It was a perfect, I think, illustration of what we're doing within the network, but also just a great articulation of what the church's vision is. And I really just want to say thank you for taking the time to articulate that, because to this point we've hit upon this in many different ways in a lot of our shows, but to go through the different principles as we have done, we haven't done that yet, and I think this is just going to be a nugget for our current audience and for future listeners. So, KJ, if anyone has interest to reach out and connect and meet with you, what's the best way for them to follow up and contact you?
Would be our website, elinvestments.net. And then you can fill out a form to have an appointment with me or another advisor. But elinvestments.net is the website, and that's the best way to get a hold of us.
Good. And that, folks, again, stands for Ethos Logos Investments. We didn't really even get a chance to go into the name, but they'll have to just follow up with you, separately in a call and ask. I do love the name, by the way. But KJ, thanks so much for being on the show and sharing us your guidance, your wisdom, and the good work that you've done. May God bless, continue to bless your efforts and your endeavors. Really appreciate your attendance here on the show today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. And until next time, God's blessings to you.